Welcome everyone to the Aspen Institute Project Play 2020 Summit. Today's panel discussion is titled A Historic Challenge for Schools. I'm your moderator and my name is Mark Rooks. I'm the VP of Community Marketing and Sports Matter at Dick's Sporting Goods. Today we'll be discussing the following topic. As high school sports experts analyze the immense challenges facing many schools now and moving forward, many must contend with an unusual set of circumstances as a result of the pandemic. Pushed off seasons, rising costs, slashed budgets, increased liability and insurance concerns, mounting mental health problems, and diminished college sports opportunities. So how are schools tackling these challenges at a time when they're also trying to return to learning? But before we start our discussion and really dive into that question and others, I figured I'd take a second to just introduce the great set of panelists we have joining us today. So let me just start out with Dr. Karissa Niehoff, who is the Executive Director for the National Federation of State High School Associations. Karissa, thank you for joining us. Cecelie Owens, who is the Assistant Superintendent of PE, Health, and Athletics for Buffalo Public Schools. Cecelie, thank you for joining us. Dr. Tim McGuine, he's a distinguished scientist at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. Dr. McGuine, thank you for joining us. And Drake Lewis, he's a high school senior and student athlete at Murray High School in Washington, D.C. Drake, thank you so much for joining us today. All right, so maybe we can start out with a very general question, that first question I asked, which is, how are schools and local and state sort of officials tackling the challenge, this really unique challenge at a time when we're also trying to return to learning? And maybe, Karissa, I'll start out with you, if you don't mind.
Well, sure. Thank you and welcome, everyone. I hope all who are listening are well and your families are well. The NFHS has kept a close watch on what's happening across the 50 states and Washington, D.C., the 51 associations. And right now, we see that we have about 37 states that have modified their schedules, 14 that have not, and 19 at this point that are choosing not to play fall football. So basically what that tells us is that there is a national mosaic of different decisions that are being made across the country. The process is primarily collaborative between state association leadership, governor's offices, and sports med advisory committees, state health agencies. And through collaborative conversation, really looking at the COVID situation at the state and then local levels, decisions are being made. And obviously they may look different from town to town, county to county, state to state. So we're in the process of making decisions, getting kids back into playing at varying degrees, and then even reconsidering some of those decisions based on a close monitoring of COVID situation. But it's definitely a unique process from state to state, but we're very confident as we watch what's happening nationwide that the right people are involved, it's not easy, and the best interest of kids is at heart.
That's great. Cecelie, maybe you can give us your perspective and what you've seen so far in Buffalo Public Schools.
Yes, hi. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Hope everyone is doing well also, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this awesome, robust discussion. So yes, I agree with Ms. Karissa, as far as being a collaborative effort to get kids back to playing sports safely. In Buffalo, our superintendent is looking at all of these decisions that have to be made through a scientific lens, basically, on what the uptick is in the virus and things like that, and the pandemic, and erring on the side of kids. But one thing that's been going on, and our staff has been doing an awesome job, all our administrators and associate superintendents, central office staff, is we've been in a lot of conversations around how to reopen schools. I think that we need to see how that goes first before we invite kids back to play sports.
Maybe I'll just stay with you, Tim. My next question I was going to ask, what are some of the real consequences of shutting down sports generally, really across the spectrum, athletes up to officials?
Well, and this gets into some of the research we did this last spring. So we did a nationwide survey of adolescent athletes looking at physical activity, quality of life, and most importantly, mental health. And we were very concerned because our findings showed that the mental health conditions of these kids deteriorated quite a bit when schools and sports were canceled in May. And we understand there were a lot of things going on with high unemployment, schools being gone, but we also looked at the fact that athletes really do pretty well compared to non-athletes for all those activities, for quality of life, mental health, physical activity. Our findings showed, however, that the spike in mental health issues was quite alarming. We always knew there would be, when we do studies like this over the years, that the girls were reporting more mental health issues than boys. But the scope we saw now is incredible. And when we looked at other factors, such as the type of sports they played, the team sport participants seemed to be affected the most. The loss of the social connectedness with their teammates was gone. While the tennis player who could still play was affected, we saw higher levels in the kids that were missing their team sports. We also looked at poverty levels, how things were magnified for poverty. So team sport participants in high poverty areas in the United States, their mental health, we showed moderate to severe levels of mental health issues in 50% of those kids, which is much more than the kids in the higher economic situations. And so that's a concerning as well. So we know the girls are affected, but when we look at the type of sport participation and poverty level, all these things really, really increase the mental health conditions that we saw much higher than we ever anticipated.
Wow. And when you say mental health issues, just for my own benefit, what exactly do you mean? Do you mean depression or?
So yeah, we used a couple of standardized questionnaires that clinicians use, pediatricians will use to screen kids in their clinics. And we used an anxiety questionnaire and a depression questionnaire. So the questions are similar, but anxiety we know is a big mental health issue, and depression itself is a huge issue. And whereas we would see levels in normal times of kids maybe 5 to 6% reporting moderate to severe depression, that was going up to 45 and 50% in this population in May. So there were just a lot of things going on. So that we're looking at anxiety and depression, particularly for mental health.
Wow. So Karissa, I'm interested if you have an opinion on, as we look back on 2020 and even 2021 and some of the decisions that are being made, whether or not you believe the sort of costs, or the benefits outweigh the costs in making decisions to shut down sports.
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, it's the essential question. And when we talk benefits, let's consider the whole picture. To Dr. McGuine's point, the mental health issues have emerged so that we're seeing decisions being made that are almost like a pendulum type of motion, where initially a lot of the emphasis was strictly on COVID, precautionary measures, appropriate protocols in place, which are there. We started to hear from research reports like Dr. McGuine's study, which has been central for the Federation family, but also anecdotal reports from states that their schools are reporting higher numbers of suicides and things like that. And families are reporting disruption in the home. So there's this need for kids, and kids are using their voice. Families are using their voice appropriately to say, if we are ready, safety measures in place, we want to play. So we're starting to see a sort of a new element in the bigger picture of the decision making. So when we talk about costs and benefits, I think we're all realizing this is a much more complex conversation, a much more emotional conversation. And I think, Mark, I think we're in this sort of new era of ambiguity, whether we're an administrator academically, an athletic administrator, a parent, a student, a coach. Our collective ecosystem is in this new place where there is no right or wrong, maybe across the board, and it is fluid. And what are the risks versus the benefits? And what are those risks we're willing to take if we think we're ready? So if we consider all of that, and then we look at, to your question, I apologize for being a little long-winded.
No, this is perfect.
If we talk about the fiscal cost benefit, I will tell you that our state associations, while they are facing very dire fiscal deficits and cost and loss of revenue, that has not once been the priority in conversations we have on a weekly basis with state association leaders. That being said, I can tell you that by canceling sports for the right reasons, winter sports, spring sport, and potentially fall revenues, we have a handful of state associations that are at great risk of not being able to keep the doors open and the lights on. So we reported in the spring that state associations lost anywhere from $200,000 to well over $2 million just from the loss of last winter and spring championships.
Wow.
So it's important for states and schools to have revenue, but that has not been the driver in my experience as far as why decisions are made. It's really been more about readiness, consideration of the bigger picture, and whether or not resources are there, especially in the urban areas, to have all kids able to learn as well as engage in co-curricular experiences. But it's serious, very serious.
I can imagine. Cecelie, I'm interested in your point of view on this topic as well, cost versus benefit, or if you view it that way at all.
Well, we know that our state is facing a lot of budgetary cuts per our governor, which is going to affect about 700 school districts, which is going to have a domino effect in the many areas in our schools. Staffing, textbooks and materials and resources and things of that nature. So, I think it's important to think outside the box, do the very, very best that we can with what we have, and not make excuses to meet our students and families' needs. Because there's always cuts somewhere every year. So versus, grappling over it or debating or complaining or murmuring, it is what it is. And we just try to do the best we can with what we have. But that social emotional, the mental health piece is something that I'm very proud of our district, because our district administrators and teachers and parents, we've all come together to make sure that social emotional learning is embedded in the daily instructions. So that is something that they're expected to teach every day. Right now, with the reopening plan for 14 days, they're expected to teach those social emotional learning, making sure they're checking in with kids before instruction starts. And I bring that up to say that the same kids that I'm talking about are the athletes.
Wow.
So it's the same kids. So they're getting that support and those resources that they need to stay mentally healthy and fit.
That's great. Thank you. Hey, Drake, so I'm curious to see if you have had conversations with your peers and teammates and how they feel about this unusual year and sports being shut down in certain cases.
It sucks because I know my teammates and football especially, because this would have been our senior season, but it's not a good situation because I know that I and like a bunch of my teammates, we kind of rely on football as an outlet, like a sort of release after having a long school day and then just going to practice, having fun in practice with your teammates. And it's like some form of like camaraderie that we have that just adds on to it. So we're missing that part of sports right now. And I forgot who said this earlier, but the mental health aspect, like it clearly shows, because instead of being able to go out and, play sports, because I know I have a friend who plays volleyball and she can't go out and play sports, but you're cooped up in the house all day doing schoolwork, but you can't really go outside and do what you want to do. So it's just not a good situation, but it's improving. For some states, I know they've started opening back up and playing sports. Like I know Ohio is starting to play football and pick back up again. And we're just kind of waiting for everything else in the DMV to open back up.
Oh, that's interesting. You mentioned volleyball. As kind of we near winter, can you guys share your thoughts on whether or not you view indoor sports like volleyball or basketball or swimming differently than you do some of the team sports like baseball and football? And Karissa, maybe I'll kick it over to you to address this one.
Well, they are different. Obviously, scientific evidence is bearing out more and more that the importance of air exchange, being able to have space, airflow. We're actually doing an aerosol study right now in partnership with 2 universities, looking at playing of musical instruments, singing, speaking, aerobic exertion, to try to understand aerosol spread when you're inside a facility versus outside, all sorts of things. And we're learning, obviously, going outside is a less risky environment. However, we're seeing schools that are going back to volleyball indoors with precautionary measures in place. It's early in those seasons. We are hearing that reports are good, that we're not seeing a large spike or evidence of COVID contagion due to participation in the sport activity. That being said, I think the real concern is the physical proximity for length of time. So you look at a sport like wrestling, which is indoors, not outdoors, but the bodies are so close together for such an extended amount of time, your risk is higher there. Interesting, we're seeing USA Volleyball and even a couple of states look at staging outdoor volleyball as an option to be able to play in the fall, looking at AstroTurf situations with volleyball standards and the equipment, being able to play outdoors. So folks are being very creative.
Drake, you had mentioned a little bit earlier about some of the schools in, some of the states surrounding the DC area that might have sports or not. And I've noticed a pretty interesting phenomenon that's happening now with parents and athletes moving across state lines to avoid sport shutdowns. I'm interested if you've seen that and if you have an opinion on it. Do you consider it cheating or fair, or or is it something that you've ever thought about?
I haven't thought about it personally, doing it myself. I think a while ago, my mom kind of told me that seniors were transferring to other schools in order to play their sport, because the problem with playing with fall sports being moved to the spring as a senior is that you can't get recruited for that sport, or you can't raise your ranking. Where you're recruited at the end of your junior year, that's where you stay. So if I played football and I had a pretty good junior year, that's where I'm recruited at. I can't improve my ranking my senior year, which is usually what happens. That's why some kids have decided to go across state lines and transfer to different schools in order to play their fall sport, in order to improve their ranking so they can go to the school that they want or get more opportunities to go to college.
Chris, I'm interested in your perspective on this. I happen to be actually watching some kids in high school sports play and notice the number of kids. It's not a huge number, but it seems like it's something that's kind of, the result of what's happened here with the pandemic. So I'm interested to your perspective on this.
Yeah, so I so appreciate what you said, Drake. You just strike me as an amazing young man. I'm so honored to be on a panel with you. But we see nationwide, every state association has rules that try to protect the transfer situation from being about athletics. There are a number of reasons that kids need to move schools, and some of those reasons are easy, some of them are hard. So we generally have rules that have hardship exceptions. And those are generally really tough family or personal life situations, even academic life situations. When we start to get at transferring for athletic purposes only, state associations really try to prevent that from happening for a number of reasons. The first is that in reality, a very, very small percentage of kids will go on to play at the university level. Depending on the sport, it's less than 1% up to maybe 6%. At the D, and this is across D1, 2, and 3. So if you talk about D1 with scholarship, you're talking about even fewer kids. So there are kids, as Drake mentioned, there you might have a ranking that really is important, that you've got to get that fall season in, and that is such a small handful of kids that may need to count on athletics in their future for a collegiate opportunity. But the general student athlete population in high school is not going to go on and play in college. So we really try to message the bigger picture that high school athletics is an education-based experience. Not only are you uprooting a child from their academic environment, their social environment, a lot of things that are there in support of that child, but now you're going to another place where you may be not settling it may not work out for the reasons you anticipate and count on. And then we also want folks to consider that you may be unseating someone else. And now there's COVID to consider. Are you moving from one place to another relative to COVID precautions? So we want folks to keep a perspective. We are not seeing a large amount of kids, to your point. It is a small number, but they're high profile. Because they're high profile kids, there's usually a waiver process around it, a hearing around it, and a lot of them are jumping state lines. So it's a legitimate family move. So it's a legitimate transfer, but it's a high profile kid. So it generates a lot of the energy around the whole notion of transferring.
That's interesting. Drake, you have mentioned the idea of, which I found really interesting, I hadn't thought about, is that you basically lose an opportunity to be recruited in your senior year, even if you have sports pushed off until the spring. One of the other consequences, I think you're a multi-sport athlete, or you're not, you baseball and football. So now with your sport being pushed back to the spring and having overlapping sports, are you anticipating any challenges or that make next spring a little different than a normal year for you?
So usually the past couple of years, after football season in the fall, during the winter, we have like an indoor facility where it's player-led practices because we're not supposed to practice yet at the team, but it's player-led practices indoors during the winter. And then that feeds into like February or March is when our season starts. But this year, because football is February to April and then baseball's April to June, there's that tiny overlap. So instead of getting ready for baseball season like I normally would, it's going to be football season is what I'm going to be getting ready for. So I just feel like for some people, they're not going to be as prepared for their second sport as they usually are. And I know one of my teammates for the past couple of years, travel team, he plays 3 sports. So it's even worse for him, where he has to do basketball, football, and baseball back to back without any breaks. So it's just you're going to see a lot of people kind of out of rhythm and having to, I guess, go slow at the beginning and then try and gain that rhythm in the short amount of time that they have.
Drake, is it Drake?
Yeah.
You seem like a go-getter. You know what you want. You working hard. I play college ball. You didn't mention basketball as one of your sports, but that's okay. But I want to know. So you are intrinsically, into you're into what you need to do for yourself. You know what it takes for you to be a successful student athlete. What about those kids who don't have that same intrinsic value?
Well, that's the problem with the pandemic. Especially early on when team sports were cut off, it was kind of independent. So you had to have that drive to kind of work and get better yourself, whether it was like going out and running or doing drills on your own. But as more things are starting to open back up, I guess there are more opportunities for kids to go out and do things with other people, which may help out with that enthusiasm to go out and play that sport if they lacked it. And it doesn't have to be a big group. Like it could be a small group of 6 or 10 kids or however many, but because sometimes, like you said, kids don't have that drive to go out and want to get better, especially if they don't have like a love for that sport or it doesn't really mean a lot to them. But what may mean a lot to them is playing with other people and having some form of, friendship or just talking to other people, having social interaction. So I guess doing small groups of that may help improve that.
That's great. I can't remember who covered it earlier, but we were talking about innovation and creativity. And Tim, I'm curious, given what you've learned in your study, have you seen any best practices from a mental wellness standpoint that programs are trying to implement to counteract the effect of what you learned is the result of the pandemic? So there's this.
I think, and somewhat feeding off of what Cecelie mentioned about checking in at the beginning of the class, was a great opportunity. The things that I've seen in schools around this area here that aren't playing sports right now, even though the coaches can't get physically involved with the kids, they're trying to get online and stay involved as much as they can, mentally, socially, to get that interaction, to see their teammates together, to check in with the athletes beyond, what they would normally do in their actual practice setting. So I think that's the biggest thing I've seen, where school districts are innovating and saying, yes, you're a coach. No, you don't have a season now, but you still have a team. Yeah. And your team has needs that you need to meet. And let's move forward and identify that and to keep that. And some of the parents have talked to me that just that team meeting and a regular time scheduled per week to get together with their teammates and their coach made a world of difference. And I commend school districts for doing that type of option or having that option for their kids.
Right. All right, so we're getting close to time here, and I figured I'd ask just one more question before we kind of wrap things up today. We've obviously seen a massive amount of change here in the last few months due to the pandemic, we've probably learned a lot. I'm curious to hear from all the panelists, whether or not you think anything is going to become the new standard, or will things kind of go back to the way they were after, and I'm optimistically saying after things kind of return to normal and get better. So, what do you expect as we look out on 2021 and beyond? Will there be a new normal, or will we kind of revert back to where we were pre-COVID? And Karissa, I'll kick it over to you if you want to start out, and then go to Cecelie and Drake and have Tim wrap up.
Yeah, well, boy, don't we all wish we had a crystal ball, right? I do think there will be some new normal. I think we will be taking a closer look when we do like a pre-participation physical. I think we're going to need to explore to a greater degree cardiopulmonary issues. We're just now learning a little bit more about perhaps a correlation between COVID-19 and permanent effect on the cardiac muscle. And we will learn more about that, of course, but I think some of those preconditions, I think, will expand as we look at our health screenings of kids. I think we'll see more regular monitoring of health. I think we'll see a more permanently emphasized hygienic practices, sanitation of equipment in the reconditioning process, careful monitoring there. And I think we'll see a greater emphasis on education. We've been enjoying that trend anyway. Concussion has driven us to do this, really calling to the forefront of the importance of risk minimization education for everybody involved. I think we'll be doing a broader swath of education now about health and wellness, and I think mental health is going to be a part of that. I think we've seen more creative teaching and coaching practices now. Technology is a core component and a potential avenue for instruction and coaching, certainly for communication. And I think our kids, they're just fantastic, naturally inclined experts to be creative in this space. I think this can help us keep our programs strong and our kids engaged should we ever have another crisis of this nature going forward. But I think high school sports and activities will survive well, will survive more informed, and I think more kids will get engaged. I would like to shout out to Aspen Institute for looking at the High School Sports Reimagined initiative, which I think COVID in a way is teeing us up to even talk further about this. So I think we're going to be fine and more informed.
Great. Cecelie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Karissa. I think it's going to be a new normal. The way schools look, athletics look, everything looks up. Food service, how we serving lunches, transportation, all those things. And you know, I think this time of the pandemic has created a lot of stress and anxiety for people, adults, kids, animals probably. I don't know, I don't have any animals, but you know, and it's a time that I think people came together and worked together to create a plan that's going to be safe around all facets of the organization, whether it's a school, hospital, you know, things like that. But I think, you know, moving forward when it comes to sports, yes, really putting in that safety plan. What does it look like when kids walk on that field or that court? How do we address our spectators, the officials, you know, eating during, you know, just a whole slew of things. We could talk about it all day, but yeah, I think it's a new normal built around safety and health and wellness.
Tim?
I guess I'm going to agree with both Karissa and Cecelia. I think that the physical aspect, controlling some of the infection, mitigating strategies are important. I'm interested to see what happens to enrollment numbers in terms of sports. You know, there's an economic component here to what we're dealing with the pandemic, and we know that there's a cost to participate in sports. Some kids may not have the money to get involved in youth sports to even want to play in high school sports. I'm concerned about that, to see moving forward how that moves. I hope that we can do that. I think we're going to have to do an education effort to kids and parents to say that the schools are doing their best efforts to make things safe, to move forward. I'd love to see, in addition to that physical screening that Karissa mentioned, that mental screen, if we can ask 9 questions about mental health at the beginning of the year. It would literally take the athlete less than 5 minutes to fill that out. I'm concerned about 30 or 40% having depression, but I'm also concerned about 10% or 5% of the athletes that reported depression before the pandemic. That may be an indicator that we can deal with that as well. So I think, yes, this is going to be a challenge, but in some ways, as Karissa mentioned, there's some opportunities here that we can remake and reshape and make athletics better for high school kids moving forward.
That's great.
The glass has got to be half full sometime, right?
That's right. Hey, Drake, and you'll help wrap us up here. What are your thoughts on what you see for the future related to this?
Well, I agree with everybody about the new normal situation. And I think it kind of depends on the sport. I know for high school right now, some places do it differently where for baseball, because I played it during the summer, umpires were positioned in a different spot so they couldn't really see every call. It was a mess. So I think baseball will eventually go back to the way it was with safety precautions. But I think a big impact would be placed upon travel teams, like as in AAU and volleyball, because I know the way those work, they sometimes have a bunch of teams in like an arena with multiple courts. I think because of the pandemic, they're going to try to reduce overcrowding areas. And so in order to do that, you're not going to have every team in that arena. You just might have a few teams every other court in order to reduce the, I guess, potential of having a lot of people being sick.
Well, thank you all for a really healthy discussion today. I've learned a lot and really enjoyed it. I appreciate you guys contributing to today's panels. Karissa, Cecelie, Tim, Drake, I wish you all the best of luck and a great rest of the year. So thank you for participating.